I never imagined that being forced to cook every single meal during our family vacation would lead to discovering I owned the entire Celestial Waters resort chain. But sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Before we jump back, and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Standing in the pristine kitchen of Villa Serenidad at Paradise Cove Resort, sweat beading on my forehead as I prepared yet another elaborate breakfast for 8 people, I watched through the window as my stepfamily lounged by the infinity pool. My stepmother Vivian reclined on a designer lounger, her perfectly manicured nails catching the morning sun as she sipped the mimosa I'd prepared an hour earlier. My stepsisters Brooke and Madison were taking selfies in their matching designer bikinis, completely oblivious to the fact that someone had been up since 5 a.m. making their fresh fruit parfaits and artisanal breakfast sandwiches. Sophia, Vivian's voice carried across the open-concept living space with that particular tone of entitled impatience I'd grown to dread. The coffee's getting cold, and Madison specifically requested those little heart-shaped pancakes you made yesterday. Don't keep us waiting. I gritted my teeth, flipping another batch of pancakes on the commercial-grade stovetop. This was supposed to be a family bonding vacation to celebrate Dad's 55th birthday at one of the most exclusive resorts in the Caribbean. Instead, I'd somehow become the unpaid private chef for the entire group. "Coming right up," I called back, forcing cheerfulness into my voice while internally screaming. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a successful executive chef who'd trained at Le Cordon Bleu and had run high-end restaurant kitchens in San Francisco for the past 5 years, reduced to being treated like hired help by my own family. But pointing out my professional credentials had only made things worse 3 days ago. "Oh, Sophia thinks she's some hotshot chef now." Brooke had laughed when I'd tried to suggest we order room service instead of me cooking everything from scratch. "Just because you flip burgers at some restaurant doesn't mean you're Gordon Ramsay." The comment had stung more than I'd let on. My restaurant, Sage and Thyme, wasn't just some restaurant. It was a Michelin-starred establishment that had earned critical acclaim and a 3-month waiting list. But explaining that would only invite more mockery from my stepfamily, who had perfected the art of diminishing my achievements over the past 7 years since Dad remarried. I plated the heart-shaped pancakes with fresh berries and a drizzle of local honey, adding the little touches that my professional training had made second nature. Even in this frustrating situation, I couldn't help but take pride in my presentation. "Finally," Madison muttered as I set the plate before her, not bothering to look up from her phone. "These better be as good as yesterday's, or I'm ordering room service." "Room service takes forever," Vivian chimed in, adjusting her oversized sun hat. "Besides, why pay resort prices when we have our own personal chef?" "Sophia doesn't mind, do you, dear?" Her smile was saccharine sweet, the kind that never reached her eyes. My father, Thomas, looked up from his newspaper with a slightly uncomfortable expression. "Maybe we could give Sophia a break today. Let her enjoy the beach or the spa." "Don't be silly, Thomas," Vivian waved dismissively. "She's the only one who knows how to work that fancy kitchen, and you know how particular the girls are about their food. Besides, she seems to enjoy it." I most certainly did not enjoy spending my vacation as an unpaid servant, but challenging. Vivian directly would only create the kind of family drama that would ruin Dad's birthday celebration. I'd learned over the years that keeping the peace was easier than standing my ground, even when it meant sacrificing my own comfort. "It's fine, Dad," I said quietly, catching his apologetic look. "I really don't mind, but I did mind. I minded that I'd spent my vacation budget on this trip, expecting to relax and reconnect with my father, only to be relegated to kitchen duty. I minded that Brooke and Madison treated me like invisible staff rather than their stepsister. Most of all, I minded that Vivian had somehow convinced everyone this arrangement was not only acceptable, but preferable. "Oh, and Sophia," Vivian called as I began clearing the breakfast dishes. "We're having a dinner party tonight. I invited the Hendersons from the villa next door, plus that lovely couple from the yacht club. Something elegant, perhaps that salmon thing you made last summer, for 12 people? My stomach dropped. A formal dinner party for 12 with only a few hours' notice, in a vacation rental kitchen with limited supplies? It would require a trip to the local market, hours of prep, work, and perfect execution, all while my stepfamily continued their leisurely vacation activities. 12 people? I repeated, trying to keep the dismay out of my voice. I knew you'd be excited, Vivian beamed, completely misreading my expression. It'll be such a wonderful opportunity to show off your little cooking hobby. The Hendersons were so impressed when I mentioned we had our own personal chef. Personal chef. Hobby. The words grated against everything I'd worked to achieve in my culinary career. But before I could respond, Brooke jumped in with her own demands. Can you make those little chocolate lava cakes for dessert? And maybe some of those appetizer things with the fancy cheese? Oh, and make sure there's a vegetarian option. Madison's going through one of her phases again. As my stepfamily continued planning their evening entertainment around my labor, I felt a familiar resignation settle over me. This was how it had always been since Vivian entered our lives. My needs and comfort came last, my contributions taken for granted, my professional accomplishments reduced to little hobbies that existed solely for their benefit. Little did I know that this particular act of selfless service would lead to the most shocking revelation of my life, one that would turn everything I thought I knew about my family and my own identity completely upside down. As I headed toward the kitchen to start planning tonight's dinner party menu, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I could continue accepting this treatment. What I didn't realize was that the answer would come much sooner than expected, and in a way that would change everything forever. The universe, it seemed, was about to serve up some justice of its own. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The local market in downtown Playa Dorada was bustling with afternoon shoppers when I finally escaped the villa, armed with a lengthy shopping list for tonight's impromptu dinner party. I'd managed to convince Vivian that I needed special ingredients that could only be found at the authentic local market. Partly true, but mostly an excuse to get away from the suffocating atmosphere of forced servitude. I was examining fresh red snapper at the fishmonger's stall, mentally calculating portions for 12 guests when a familiar voice spoke behind me. "Excuse me, are you Sofia Castellanos?" I turned to find a tall, impeccably dressed woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. Her linen blazer and understated jewelry suggested someone accustomed to luxury, but her warm smile felt genuine rather than pretentious. "Yes, I am," I replied cautiously, wondering how this stranger knew my name. "I'm Elena Vasquez, General Manager of Paradise Cove Resort," she said, extending her hand. "I was hoping I might run into you during your stay. Your father mentioned you were visiting us for his birthday celebration." My father had mentioned me to the resort management? That seemed unusual, especially since he'd barely acknowledged my presence since we'd arrived, too caught up in Vivian's carefully orchestrated vacation schedule. "It's lovely to meet you," I said politely, still puzzled by this unexpected encounter. "The resort is absolutely beautiful. We're staying in Villa Serenidad." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ah, one of our premier properties? I trust everything has been to your satisfaction?" "Oh yes, everything's been wonderful," I assured her, not mentioning that I'd barely had time to enjoy any of the resort's amenities beyond the villa's kitchen. "Excellent. Actually, I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to chat. Perhaps over coffee at Café Azul?" She gestured toward a charming outdoor cafe across the street. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you if you don't mind." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't a casual social invitation. My curiosity piqued despite my time constraints. I suppose I could spare a few minutes, I said, glancing at my watch. Though I do need to get back soon to prepare dinner. A brief shadow crossed Elena's face. Preparing dinner? Are you not utilizing our concierge services? We have excellent catering options, or our chef can prepare meals directly in your villa. I hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation without airing family drama to a stranger. Oh, it's not necessary. I enjoy cooking, and my stepmother thought it would be nice if I handled the meals personally. Elena studied my face with a perceptive gaze that made me feel like she was seeing more than I was saying. I see. Well, all the more reason to chat then. Please, it won't take long. 5 minutes later, we were seated at a corner table overlooking the marina, where million-dollar yachts bobbed gently in the azure water. Elena ordered 2 cortados and waited until the server was out of earshot before speaking. Sophia, I hope you don't mind my directness, but I'm a bit confused about your family's arrangements during this visit. My stomach tightened. Had the resort staff been gossiping about our family dynamics? I'm not sure what you mean. When your father made the reservation, he specifically requested our premium concierge services, including private chef accommodations and full meal planning for your group. Those services were prepaid as part of the villa package. Elena paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Yet our staff reports that no one has utilized these services, and our chef team has been wondering why their services were declined. I stared at her, confusion washing over me. I wasn't aware of any chef services. Vivian, my stepmother, said the villa came with a full kitchen and that it would be more authentic if we prepared our own meals. More authentic, Elena repeated slowly, her tone carefully neutral. I see. And you've been doing all the cooking yourself? Heat crept up my neck. Yes, but I don't mind. I'm actually a professional chef, so… A professional chef? Elena's eyes sharpened with interest. How wonderful! Where do you work? I run a restaurant in San Francisco called Sage and Thyme. It's actually received some recognition, I said modestly, still uncomfortable with this stranger's intense focus on my situation. Elena nearly choked on her coffee. Sage and Thyme? The Michelin-starred restaurant? You're that Sophia Castellanos? At my surprised nod, she continued, My goodness, your restaurant was featured in Culinary Excellence magazine just last month. The critic called your tasting menu transcendent. I felt a warm flush of pride, so different from the dismissive treatment I'd grown accustomed to from my stepfamily. You read Culinary Excellence? Religiously. I'm something of a food enthusiast. Myself, though obviously not at your level. Elena leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. Sophia, forgive me for being blunt, but something doesn't add up here. Your father books premium services including a private chef team. You're a world-renowned chef yourself, yet you're spending your vacation cooking for your family instead of enjoying our amenities. The weight of the situation suddenly felt crushing, when laid out so starkly by an objective observer. It's complicated family dynamics, I said quietly. I'm sure it is. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. However, I feel obligated to mention that this arrangement is highly unusual for guests of your background. My background? Elena hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. Sophia, when I saw your name on the guest registry, I did some research. Sage and Thyme isn't just successful, it's part of a larger culinary empire. The press coverage mentions your involvement with several restaurant groups and hospitality ventures. My confusion deepened. I think there might be some mistake. I own one restaurant, that's all. Elena's expression shifted to something resembling concern. Oh dear. Sophia, I think perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere, more private. Would you mind terribly if we stepped into my office at the resort? There are some things I believe you should know, and I'm beginning to suspect that you haven't been given the full picture of, well, several important matters. A chill ran down my spine despite the tropical heat. Something in Elena's tone suggested this conversation was about to become much more significant than a casual chat about resort services. "What kind of things?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elena signaled for the check, her movements suddenly urgent. "The kind of things that might explain why you're cooking for your family at a resort you—" "Well, let's discuss this. Privately, shall we?" As we stood to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Where are you? Madison wants those appetizers ready by 5 p.m. Don't be late." I showed Elena the message, and her expression hardened. "Sophia, I think it's time you learned exactly who you are and what you're entitled to. This has gone quite far enough." The mysterious weight in her words made my heart race. What could Elena possibly know about me that I didn't know about myself? And why did I suddenly feel like my entire world was about to shift beneath my feet? Elena's office at Paradise Cove Resort was a study in understated elegance, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pristine coastline and walls adorned with awards and certifications. But I barely noticed the decor as she closed the door behind us and gestured for me to take a seat in one of the plush leather chairs facing her mahogany desk. "Sophia, before we begin, I need to ask you a question that might seem strange," Elena said, settling into her chair with a grave expression. "What do you know about your mother's family background?" The unexpected question caught me off guard. "My mother? She passed away when I was 16. Cancer. Why would that be relevant to—" "I'm sorry for your loss," Elena interrupted gently. "But please humor me. What was her maiden name?" "Rivera. Isabella Rivera. She was from a family in Mexico originally, but they moved to California when she was young." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. "Elena, I really don't understand what this has to do with resort services or—" Elena opened a folder on her desk and pulled out several documents. "Sophia, your mother's full name was Isabella Rivera Mendoza. The Rivera Mendoza family didn't just move to California. They built one of the largest hospitality empires in Latin America and the Caribbean." My mouth went dry. "That's impossible. My mother worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. We lived in a modest apartment. If she came from money, why would we have struggled financially after Dad remarried?" "Because," Elena said carefully, "your mother chose to live modestly while she was alive, but she never renounced her inheritance. When she passed, everything was held in trust until you reached the age of 25. She slid a document across the desk. "Sophia, you turned 28 3 months ago." I stared at the legal document, my hands trembling as I tried to process the words. Trust fund, beneficiary, asset transfer. The numbers were staggering, not thousands or even hundreds of thousands, but figures with so many zeros I had to count them twice. "This can't be real," I whispered. "I would have known. Someone would have told me." Elena's expression grew more serious. "Someone should have told you. Your father was designated as the trustee until you came of age. He should have informed you of your inheritance when you turned 25. The room seemed to spin around. Me. Dad knew? He knew about this money and never said anything? Not just money, Sophia. Assets, properties, business holdings." Elena pulled out another set of documents, including a 60% controlling stake in Celestial Waters Resort. Chain? I felt like I might faint. Celestial Waters. But that's one of the most prestigious resort chains in the world. 12 properties across the Caribbean, Mediterranean, and Pacific. Paradise Cove Resort is the flagship property. Elena paused, letting this information sink in. "Sophia, you don't just own shares in Celestial Waters. You are Celestial Waters. You're the majority shareholder, which makes you, essentially, my boss." The papers in my hands felt surreal, like props from someone else's life. But how is this possible? Why wouldn't my father tell me? Why would he let me think we were just normal guests here? Elena's jaw tightened with what looked like suppressed anger. That's an excellent question. One that becomes even more troubling when you consider that your stepmother has been making herself quite comfortable with the assumption that your father has the authority to make decisions about celestial waters properties. What do you mean? Over the past 3 years, Mrs. Vivian Castellanos has contacted our corporate offices multiple times, claiming to represent your father's interests in the company. She's requested detailed financial reports, attempted to influence staffing decisions at various properties, and even suggested changes to our operating procedures. Elena's voice grew colder. She's been acting as though she has some claim to authority over your inheritance. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The frequent family trips to expensive resorts, Vivian's obsession with luxury accommodations, her connections to hospitality industry events. I looked up at Elena, feeling nauseous. She knew, didn't she? She knew about my inheritance all along. I believe so, yes. And I suspect that's why she's gone to such lengths to keep you occupied during this visit. The less you know about your actual position, the more she can manipulate the situation to her advantage. I thought about the past 3 days, the endless cooking, the dismissive treatment, the way Vivian had insisted I stay busy in the kitchen while she networked with other resort guests. She'd been deliberately keeping me isolated, preventing me from discovering the truth about my own property. There's more, Elena continued, producing another folder. Your trust includes specific provisions about the management of Sage and Time. Did you know that your restaurant's success qualified it for inclusion in the Celestial Waters culinary program? Your mother's trust specifically outlined plans for expanding exceptional dining establishments into resort properties. I stared at her in shock. My restaurant is connected to all this? Your mother envisioned a future where exceptional chefs, particularly her daughter, could expand their culinary vision across multiple luxury properties. Sage and Time's success has triggered automatic inclusion in the expansion program. You're not just inheriting resorts, Sophia. You're inheriting the opportunity to create a culinary empire that spans continents. The magnitude of this revelation was overwhelming. Not only was I the owner of a major resort chain, but my life's work as a chef was apparently part of a larger legacy my mother had planned for me. A legacy that had been hidden from me for 3 years while my stepfamily treated me like hired help. Elena, I said slowly, my voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. Are you telling me that while I've been cooking breakfast, lunch, and dinner for my stepfamily as their unpaid servant, I've actually been the owner of the resort where we're staying? That's exactly what I'm telling you. I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. So when Vivian ordered me to prepare tonight's dinner party for 12 people, when she called my career a little cooking hobby, when she's been treating me like the hired help for 3 days. I trailed off, the full irony hitting me like a physical blow. She's been ordering around the woman who signs my paychecks and approves her accommodations. Elena finished quietly. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window as the anger began to build. Below, I could see the infinity pool where my stepfamily was undoubtedly still lounging, probably wondering when their personal chef would return with ingredients for tonight's elaborate meal. How long have you known? I asked without turning around. I suspected something was wrong when your father made the reservation under his name, but requested that all special arrangements be made for a Sofia Castellanos. When you didn't utilize any of the services or seem aware of your VIP status, I became concerned. I did some research this morning and confirmed your identity. I turned back to face her. And my father? What's his role in all this? Elena's expression became carefully neutral. According to the trust documents, he was supposed to transfer all information and authority to you on your 25th birthday. He's had 3 years to fulfill that responsibility. 3 years. 3 years of watching Vivian spend money on luxury vacations and designer clothes while I worked multiple jobs to keep my restaurant afloat. 3 years of being treated like an afterthought in my own family while my inheritance sat unused. 3 years of my stepfamily's casual cruelty, all while they benefited from assets that legally belonged to me. "Elena," I said, my voice steadying, with newfound resolve, "I need to ask you something important. As the majority shareholder of Celestial Waters, what authority do I have over guest accommodations and services?" A slow smile spread across Elena's face. "Complete authority. You can approve or revoke any guest privileges, modify accommodations, and direct all resort services as you see fit." I thought about Vivian's text, demanding appetizers by 5 p.m. About 3 days of being treated like hired help in my own property. About the elaborate dinner party I was expected to cater while my stepfamily entertained guests with my hospitality. "In that case," I said, feeling a surge of power I'd never experienced before, "I think it's time my family learned exactly who they've been giving orders to. And I have some new arrangements I'd like to make for tonight's dinner party." The universe's sense of humor was about to become much more apparent. The next hour was a whirlwind of revelations as Elena walked me through what she called my executive briefing. We moved to the resort's private conference room, where she'd assembled a team of department heads who'd been waiting to meet me, apparently for 3 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena announced as we entered the elegant boardroom, "I'd like you to meet Sofia Castellanos, majority owner of Celestial Waters Resort chain." The 6 people around the table stood immediately, their faces showing a mixture of relief and barely concealed frustration. A distinguished man in his 50s stepped forward first. "Ms. Castellanos, I'm Carlos Mendoza, Director of Operations for the Caribbean Properties. We've been trying to reach you through your father for quite some time." "Trying to reach me?" I asked, still adjusting to being addressed with such deference. "There have been several urgent matters requiring ownership approval," explained a sharp-looking woman in her 40s. "I'm Patricia Vega, Chief Financial Officer. Your stepmother has been intercepting many of our communications." Elena gestured for everyone to sit. "Show her the files, Patricia." Patricia opened a thick folder and spread documents across the conference table. "Over the past 18 months, we've attempted to contact you regarding expansion opportunities, partnership proposals, and strategic decisions that require majority shareholder approval. Each time your stepmother has responded, claiming to act on your behalf." I examined the correspondence, my stomach sinking as I read Vivian's responses written on what appeared to be official letterhead. She'd declined lucrative partnerships, rejected expansion opportunities, and even attempted to sell a property in Barbados without my knowledge or consent. "She tried to sell Coral Bay Resort?" I asked, incredulous. "For significantly below market value," confirmed Carlos, "to a development company that, upon investigation, we discovered has connections to her family." The calculated nature of Vivian's deception was staggering. She hadn't just hidden my inheritance, she'd been actively working to diminish it while positioning herself and her connections to benefit from the assets. "There's more," said a younger man who introduced himself as Diego Santos, Director of Culinary Operations. "Mrs. Castellanos has been pressuring us to change our chef recruitment standards and has repeatedly suggested her daughter Madison for our management training program, despite her lack of qualifications or interest in hospitality." I remembered Madison's disdainful comments about my burger flipping and nearly laughed at the irony. While dismissing my Michelin-starred restaurant, she'd been angling for a position in the very company I owned. "What about my restaurant's integration into the resort program?" I asked Diego. Elena mentioned something about expansion plans. Diego's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Your mother's vision was extraordinary. She outlined a program where exceptional independent restaurants could establish satellite locations within our resort properties, creating destination dining experiences that would elevate both the restaurant's profile and the resort's culinary reputation." He pulled out architectural plans and business projections that took my breath away. Sage and Thyme was specifically identified as the flagship concept. "We've had teams ready to implement Phase 1 for over a year, pending your approval." Phase 1 involves Paradise Cove, the Amalfi Coast property, And our new acquisition in Santorini, Patricia added. The projected revenue increase is substantial, not to mention the prestige factor. I stared at the plans, seeing my small San Francisco restaurant transformed into an international culinary brand. Why wasn't I told about any of this? Every communication was routed through your father as the designated trustee, Elena explained. When we couldn't reach you directly, we began working with what we thought was his representative, your stepmother. Carlos cleared his throat. Ms. Castellanos, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what's your current living situation? We've been under the impression that you were actively involved in overseeing the trust assets. The question was awkward, but necessary. I live in a small apartment above my restaurant in San Francisco. I work 16-hour days to keep the business profitable. Until an hour ago, I thought my net worth was whatever was in my checking account and the equity in my restaurant. The silence around the table was deafening. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Your personal trust account currently holds over $47 million. That's separate from your business assets and property holdings. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling dizzy. $47 million. While I'd been scraping together money for equipment repairs and rent increases, I'd had $47 million sitting in accounts I didn't know existed. She's been living paycheck to paycheck while sitting on a fortune, Diego murmured, shaking his head in disgust. Elena's expression hardened. It gets worse. Show her the staff reports, Carlos. Carlos produced another folder, this one containing what appeared to be incident reports and complaint forms. Your stepmother and stepsisters have been difficult guests at various properties over the years. They've demanded special treatment, been rude to staff, and have created several problematic situations. I read through reports of Vivian berating housekeeping staff at the Tuscany property, Madison throwing a tantrum at the spa in Mykonos when her preferred treatment wasn't immediately available, and Brooke attempting to charge thousands of dollars in shopping to the family account without authorization. They've been using my ownership as a way to abuse staff? I asked, my anger building. Unfortunately, yes. And because we believed they had your implicit approval, our hands were tied in addressing their behavior, Elena admitted. A soft knock interrupted our meeting. Elena's assistant entered quietly. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Vivian Castellanos is asking for the resort manager. She seems quite agitated about something. Elena and I exchanged glances. What's her complaint? Elena asked. She's demanding to know why the villa's concierge hasn't responded to her requests for additional champagne and why the private chef service hasn't arrived to begin dinner preparations. She mentioned something about unacceptable service standards. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. Vivian was complaining about the very services she'd convinced me were unnecessary, the same services she'd presumably been declining on my behalf for years. Tell Mrs. Castellanos that the resort manager will address her concerns shortly, Elena said diplomatically. After the assistant left, I turned to address the team. I want complete transparency going forward. What's the staff situation like here? Are there employees who've been affected by my family's behavior? Diego nodded grimly. Maria Santos, our head of housekeeping, submitted her resignation last month after your stepsister accused her of stealing jewelry that was later found in the guest's own luggage. She's an exceptional employee who's been with us for 8 years, and Roberto in beach services was written up because your stepmother complained he was too familiar when he offered to set up her lounge chair, Carlos added. His English isn't perfect, but he's incredibly hardworking and popular with other guests. The pattern was clear. My stepfamily had been using my ownership as a shield while treating the very people who made the resort successful with contempt and cruelty. I want to meet with every staff member who's been affected, I said firmly, and I want Maria Santos contacted immediately about returning to her position with a formal apology and compensation for the distress caused. Consider it done, Elena said with obvious approval. Patricia pulled out a tablet and began making notes. Should we also prepare documentation of your stepmother's unauthorized communications and attempted transactions? There may be legal implications. The suggestion of legal action sent a chill through me, but I nodded. Yes, I want everything documented. If she's been acting on my behalf without authorization, especially regarding property sales, I need to understand the full scope. There's one more thing, Carlos said hesitantly. Your stepmother has scheduled a meeting tomorrow morning with a potential buyer for the Antigua property. She's been in negotiations for 3 weeks. My blood ran cold. She's trying to sell. Another property? The meeting is set for 10 a.m. in the main conference room. She's expecting me to attend as a representative of ownership to finalize the deal. I looked around the table at these dedicated professionals who'd been trying to protect my assets while being systematically undermined by my own family. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but so was the surge of protective anger. I felt for the business my mother had built, and the people who'd devoted their careers to maintaining her vision. Carlos, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, I think you should definitely attend that meeting tomorrow. But there might be a few surprises about who exactly represents ownership at this resort. The time for being the accommodating stepsister was over. It was time to show my family who really owned Paradise Cove Resort, and what happened when you tried to steal from the wrong person. By the time I returned to Villa Serenidad, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I could hear laughter and conversation from the terrace as I approached through the garden path, my step-family clearly enjoying their leisurely afternoon while expecting me to have spent hours shopping and preparing for their dinner party. What they didn't expect was that I'd returned with Elena, Carlos, and Diego, along with a complete catering team from the resort's 5-star restaurant. I'd also made some interesting discoveries about tonight's guest list that were about to make the evening far more memorable than anyone anticipated. Sophia! Vivian's voice carried across the villa as I stepped onto the terrace. Finally! Where? Have you been? The Hendersons will be here in 2 hours and you haven't even started the appetizers. I surveyed the scene before me. My father lounging in a chair with a drink, Vivian arranging flowers in designer resort wear that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and my stepsisters taking selfies by the infinity pool. All of them completely oblivious to the fact that their lives were about to change dramatically. I've been taking care of the dinner arrangements, I said calmly, setting down my purse and pulling out my phone. But first, I have some interesting news to share. News can wait, Vivian said dismissively, not even looking up from her flower arrangement. Madison specifically requested those salmon canapes, and Brooke wants the chocolate soufflé recipe she saw in that magazine. You'll need to get started immediately if— Actually, Vivian, I interrupted, my voice carrying a new authority that made everyone on the terrace pause. The news can't wait. It concerns all of you directly. Dad looked up from his drink, perhaps sensing something different in my tone. Is everything all right, Sophia? Everything is perfect, Dad. Better than perfect, actually. I smiled, feeling a surge of confidence I'd never experienced before. I just had the most enlightening conversation with Elena Vasquez, the general manager of Paradise Cove Resort. Vivian's hand stilled on the flower stems. Oh? I hope you didn't bother her with any trivial complaints. The service here has been exceptional. No complaints at all. In fact, she was very helpful in clearing up some confusion about our family's relationship with the resort. I pulled out the trust documents Elena had given me, watching Vivian's face carefully, particularly regarding ownership. The color began to drain from Vivian's face, but she maintained her composure. Ownership? I'm not sure what you mean, dear. I mean that this afternoon I discovered something fascinating about my mother's family background. Something that, oddly enough, you seem to have known about for quite some time. I unfolded the legal documents, noting how Vivian's eyes immediately locked onto them. Did you know, Dad, that Mom came from the Rivera Mendoza family? Dad's expression shifted to confusion. Rivera Mendoza? Your mother never mentioned any extended family with money, if that's what you're suggesting. Not just money, Dad. The Rivera Mendoza family built the Celestial Waters resort chain. And when Mom died, she left me a 60% controlling stake in the company. I let this information settle before continuing. Which means I own Paradise Cove Resort. I own the villa we're staying in. I own the beach you've been lounging on, the restaurants you've been eating at, and every service you've been enjoying. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's phone slipped from her hands and clattered onto the stone terrace. Brooke's mouth fell open in a perfect O of shock. Dad looked like he'd been struck by lightning, but it was Vivian's reaction that confirmed everything Elena had suspected. Instead of surprise or confusion, her face showed the frozen panic of someone whose carefully constructed plan had just collapsed. That's impossible, she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. If there was any inheritance, your father would have told you. He's the trustee. He was the trustee, I corrected, pulling out my phone. But the trust transferred to me automatically when I turned 25, 3 years ago. I showed them the date on the legal documents. The same time you started taking all those expensive vacations to high-end resorts. The same time you began acting as a liaison with luxury hospitality companies. The same time you started intercepting communications intended for me. Vivian's mask finally slipped completely. Sophia, you don't understand the complexities of managing assets like these. Your father and I were protecting you from the burden of protecting me? I laughed, the sound sharp in the evening air. By making me think we were normal guests, while you've been representing yourself as having authority over my property? By declining business opportunities worth millions of dollars? By trying to sell resort properties to your family's connections? Dad struggled to his feet, his face pale. Vivian. What is she talking about? What communications? What sales? Before Vivian could answer, Elena appeared at the garden entrance with Carlos and Diego behind her. Good evening, everyone. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Elena, I smiled warmly. Perfect timing. I was just sharing the news about my inheritance with my family. Elena approached the group with professional grace, but I could see the steel beneath her polite exterior. Mr. Castellanos, I believe there are some matters we need to discuss regarding your wife's communications with our corporate offices. Communications? Dad repeated, looking increasingly bewildered. Carlos stepped forward, holding a folder. Sir, over the past 18 months, we've received numerous emails and calls from Mrs. Castellanos claiming to represent your daughter's interests as owner. She's declined partnership opportunities, attempted to authorize property sales, and made staffing recommendations. I was helping, Vivian said desperately, her composed facade cracking further. Thomas, you know how overwhelming business matters can be. I was just trying to shield Sophia from $47 million in personal assets, I asked sweetly. From expansion opportunities for my restaurant that could make it an international brand? From the ability to make my own decisions about my own inheritance? Madison, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Wait, you're saying Sophia is rich? Like, really rich? Madison, Vivian hissed. But it was too late. But you always said she was just a nobody chef who got lucky with her little restaurant, Brooke added, her confusion evident. You said Dad was supporting her because she couldn't make it on her own. The lies were unraveling in real time, and Dad's expression was shifting from confusion to horrified understanding. Vivian, did you know about Sophia's inheritance? Have you been hiding this from her? It's complicated, Thomas. It's actually quite simple, I interrupted, pulling out my phone again. Diego, would you mind calling the resort's catering team? I think it's time we properly hosted tonight's dinner party. Diego nodded and stepped away to make the call. Within moments, a team of uniformed staff appeared with carts of elegant appetizers, champagne service, and floral arrangements that put Vivian's amateur attempt to shame. You see, I continued, addressing my stunned family, as the owner of this resort, I have access to certain amenities that regular guests don't. 5-star catering, private chef services, premium concierge support. I gestured to the staff who were efficiently transforming the terrace into an elegant dining space. All the services that Vivian told me were unnecessary because she preferred my personal touch in the kitchen. The Hendersons, Vivian whispered, watching the professional setup with growing horror. What will we tell them? How do we explain? Oh, about tonight's guests? I smiled, remembering one of the most satisfying discoveries from my afternoon meetings. I had Elena check the guest registry. Jonathan Henderson is the CEO of Caribbean Luxury Development, the company you've been secretly negotiating with to, sell my Antigua property. And his wife, Patricia? She's a former Celestial Waters executive who was terminated 3 years ago for attempting to embezzle funds. The final piece of Vivian's deception was now in the open. She hadn't just been hiding my inheritance. She'd been actively working with people who had tried to defraud my company, using my own hospitality to advance their schemes against me. I think, I said, watching Vivian's face cycle through panic, rage, and desperation. Tonight's dinner party is going to be very educational for everyone involved, especially when our guests realize they've been negotiating with someone who had absolutely no authority to sell anything. As the catering staff put the finishing touches on what was clearly going to be an unforgettable evening, I felt the intoxicating rush of finally claiming my power. No more cooking for ungrateful family members. No more being dismissed and diminished. No more pretending that their comfort mattered more than my dignity. The revolution had begun, and dinner was about to be served. The Hendersons arrived at precisely 7 o'clock, just as the resort's catering team was putting the final touches on what had transformed into an obviously professional dining setup. I watched from the villa's main window as Jonathan Henderson, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit, surveyed the terrace with calculating eyes. His wife, Patricia, a sharp-featured woman who carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to luxury, immediately began photographing the elegant presentation. "Vivian," Jonathan called out as they approached, "this is absolutely stunning. You've outdone yourself with the arrangements." I exchanged a meaningful glance with Elena, who had positioned herself discreetly near the bar area. The moment of truth was about to begin. "Jonathan, Patricia, welcome," Vivian said, her voice higher than usual as she struggled to maintain composure. "Please, let me introduce you to my family." As the introductions began, I noticed Elena discreetly signaling to Carlos, who had positioned himself with a clear view of the proceedings. We'd planned this carefully. Tonight wasn't just about confronting my family's deception, but about demonstrating my competence as a business leader in front of people who had been trying to manipulate my assets. "And this is my stepdaughter, Sophia," Vivian said when she reached me, her tone dismissive despite everything that had transpired in the past hour. "She's been helping with the catering tonight." "Helping with the catering?" I repeated, my voice carrying just enough edge to make the Hendersons pause. "That's an interesting way to put it, Vivian." Jonathan Henderson extended his hand with the practiced charm of a seasoned businessman. "Pleasure to meet you, Sophia. Vivian mentioned you work in food service?" "I'm a chef," I replied, accepting his handshake with a firm grip. "I own Sage, and time in San Francisco. Perhaps you're familiar with it?" Patricia Henderson's eyebrows rose with recognition. "The Michelin-starred restaurant? I read about your tasting menu and culinary excellence. Quite impressive for someone so young." "Thank you. Though actually, my most significant role is as majority owner of Celestial Waters resort chain." I delivered this information casually, as if mentioning the weather, and watched both Hendersons freeze mid-conversation. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said slowly. "Did you say owner of Celestial Waters?" 60% controlling stake, to be precise. inherited from my mother's family. I gestured toward Elena, who stepped forward on cue. Elena Vasquez, our general manager here at Paradise Cove, has been briefing me on various business matters, including some interesting negotiations regarding our Antigua property. The color drained from Jonathan's face as he realized the implications. For 3 weeks, he'd been negotiating what he thought was an inside deal to purchase prime Caribbean, real estate below market value. Now he was discovering that his co-conspirator had no authority whatsoever, and he was standing in front of the actual owner who clearly knew about his schemes. "There seems to be some confusion," Patricia Henderson said quickly, her voice sharp with panic. "We were under the impression that Thomas, your father, was handling the property transactions." "My father was the trustee until I came of age," I explained calmly, accepting a glass of champagne from one of the resort staff. "But he never had ownership authority. All asset decisions have required my approval since I turned 25. I paused, letting this sink in. 3 years ago. Elena stepped forward with perfect timing. "Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson, I believe you might be interested to know that we've documented all communications regarding the Antigua property sale, including recordings of several phone conversations where Mrs. Castellanos claimed to have ownership authority." The professional trap was closing beautifully. While Vivian had been playing amateur conspirator, Elena and I had been gathering evidence with the thoroughness of experienced executives. Every fraudulent communication, every unauthorized negotiation, every attempted manipulation was now documented and witnessed. "This is a misunderstanding," Vivian said desperately, but her voice cracked under the pressure. "Jonathan, surely we can resolve this privately." "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out my tablet, "this is an excellent opportunity to discuss some legitimate business matters. Diego, would you join us, please?" Diego approached with a portfolio of documents, his professional demeanor a sharp contrast to the increasingly chaotic energy from Vivian and the Hendersons. "Ms. Castellanos, I have the Antigua property assessment you requested, along with the expansion proposals." I opened the portfolio, noting how the Hendersons' eyes immediately locked onto the financial projections. "You see, the Antigua property isn't just a resort. It's the planned location for the next Sage and Time satellite restaurant. The architectural plans call for a destination dining experience that will anchor a completely redesigned luxury complex." I spread the documents across the outdoor dining table, transforming our dinner party into an impromptu business presentation. The plans were stunning. My mother's vision brought to life through detailed architectural renderings and financial models that showed the property's true potential. "The projected value increase is substantial," I continued, running my finger along the revenue projections. "Once the culinary expansion is complete, the property will be worth nearly triple its current assessment. Certainly far more than the amount you were hoping to acquire it for." Jonathan Henderson stared at the documents with obvious hunger, but also the dawning realization that his inside track to a bargain purchase had evaporated completely. These plans— when did Celestial Waters develop these concepts? "My mother outlined the culinary expansion strategy over a decade ago," I replied. "She believed that exceptional dining experiences could transform luxury hospitality. What you see here is just the beginning. We have similar plans for properties in Santorini, the Amalfi Coast, and Belize." Carlos joined our growing circle, adding another layer of professional authority to the proceedings. "Ms. Castellanos, the board has been eager to implement these expansion plans. With your approval, we could begin construction on the Antigua project within 6 months." I pretended to consider this, though Elena and I had already discussed the timeline during our afternoon meetings. "The question is whether we want to proceed with development ourselves or consider a legitimate partnership with qualified developers who share our vision for sustainable luxury tourism." The message was clear: there might be real business opportunities available, but only for people who approach them honestly and professionally. The Hendersons' attempted backdoor deal had cost them any chance of legitimate involvement. "Of course," I added casually, any future partnerships would require extensive background checks and references, we've learned to be very careful about who we work with, especially after discovering that some people have been misrepresenting their authority to negotiate on our behalf. Patricia Henderson, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up with obvious desperation. "Sophia, perhaps we could discuss this privately. There may have been some miscommunication about the terms of our previous conversations with Vivian." "Miscommunication?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling attempted fraud now?" Elena stepped forward smoothly. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I think it might be best if you reviewed the legal documentation we've prepared regarding unauthorized negotiations. Our corporate counsel will be in touch regarding the resolution of this matter." The professional dismissal was final and devastating. In less than 30 minutes, I had transformed from a woman they viewed as hired help into the business leader who controlled their access to millions of dollars in prime real estate. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that they were now scrambling to salvage any possibility of legitimate business relationships. As the Hendersons made hasty excuses about needing to return to their villa, I turned to address my stunned family. Dad sat in obvious shock, processing the revelation that his wife had been conducting fraudulent business in his stepdaughter's name. Madison and Brooke looked between their mother and me with expressions of dawning understanding about who actually held power in this situation. But it was Vivian's face that showed the true impact of the evening's revelations. Her carefully constructed facade of authority had crumbled completely, replaced by the hollow-eyed panic of someone watching their entire scheme collapse in real time. "Well," I said, settling into my chair as the catering staff began serving. "The first course. Now that business is concluded, shall we enjoy dinner? I believe the chef has prepared something special for tonight." For the first time in my adult life, I wouldn't be the one cooking, serving, or cleaning up. Tonight, I would finally experience what it felt like to be treated as the owner of my own life. The aftermath of the Hendersons' hasty departure left an electric tension hanging over the elegantly set dinner table. The resort's catering staff continued their professional service as if nothing had happened, but I could sense their awareness of the family drama unfolding around them. Dad sat in stunned silence, mechanically eating the perfectly prepared sea bass while stealing glances at Vivian, who hadn't touched her food and was gripping her wine glass like a lifeline. It was Madison who broke the silence first, her voice uncharacteristically small. "So all those times you said Sophia was struggling financially, that was a lie?" Vivian's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with the desperate anger of someone cornered. "Madison, you don't understand the complexities of $47 million. Brooke interrupted, her voice rising. "You told us she was basically broke, that Dad was supporting her restaurant, that she was jealous of our lifestyle. But she's been richer than all of us this entire time?" "Girls, please," Vivian said, but her voice cracked under the pressure. There were legal complications, trust issues that needed to be resolved. "What legal complications?" Dad finally spoke, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "Vivian, I was the trustee. I knew the terms. Sophia was supposed to receive full control and disclosure when she turned 25. That was 3 years ago." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Dad was finally connecting the dots, realizing the scope of his wife's deception and his own unconscious complicity in it. "Thomas, surely you remember how overwhelmed she was with her restaurant," Vivian said, scrambling for justification. "The long hours, the financial stress. We agreed it was better to let her establish herself independently before burdening her with family business responsibilities." "We never agreed to that," Dad said quietly, but with absolute certainty. I asked, "You to help me figure out how to approach Sophia about the inheritance. You said you'd handle the initial conversations, that you'd help me find the right time and way to tell her." The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Dad hadn't been actively hiding my inheritance. he'd been manipulated into thinking Vivian was helping to plan its revelation. Meanwhile, Vivian had been intercepting communications and building her own secret empire using my assets. You used me, Dad continued, his voice growing stronger. You used my trust in you to steal from my daughter. You made me complicit in keeping her from her own inheritance while you played games with her property. Vivian's mask was completely off now, replaced by cold calculation. Your daughter? She's not your blood, Thomas. She's a reminder of your dead wife who you should have moved past years ago. I helped you build a new life, a real family, and this is how you repay me? The cruelty of the words hit Dad like a physical blow. She is my daughter. I raised her from the time she was 10 years old. Elizabeth and I may not have been her biological parents, but we chose her. We loved her. We built a family together. This revelation stopped everyone cold. I wasn't Dad's biological daughter. The information was shocking, but somehow it made Vivian's treatment of me even more calculated and cruel. Wait, I said slowly, processing this new information. If I'm adopted, how do I have Rivera Mendoza inheritance rights? Elena, who had remained discreetly nearby during the family confrontation, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Ms. Castellanos, perhaps this conversation should be private. No, I said firmly. I want to know. Everything. Right now. Elena exchanged glances with Carlos before speaking carefully. Your biological mother, Isabella Rivera Mendoza, was 17 when she became pregnant. The family arranged a private adoption with Thomas and Elizabeth Castellanos, who couldn't have biological children. Isabella insisted on maintaining some connection to you, which is why she included you in her inheritance structure. The enormity of this revelation was staggering. My entire understanding of my family history was shifting before my eyes. But it also explained something that had always puzzled me: why my mother Elizabeth had been so passionate about hospitality and business, why she'd encouraged my culinary interests so intensely. Elizabeth knew about the inheritance, Elena continued. She and Isabella maintained correspondence over the years. When Isabella died in that car accident 5 years ago, Elizabeth was diagnosed with cancer just months later. There wasn't time to properly prepare you for the inheritance transition. So Elizabeth wasn't just encouraging my career, I said slowly. She was preparing me for something she knew was coming. Your adoptive mother was an extraordinary woman, Carlos added. She worked closely with Isabella to ensure you'd be ready to handle the family business when the time came. Every conversation about hospitality, every encouragement toward culinary excellence, it was all laying groundwork for this legacy. Vivian had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, realizing that her narrative of me as an unwanted outsider was crumbling completely. I wasn't just Dad's adopted daughter who'd inherited money. I was the chosen heir of a hospitality empire, carefully prepared for leadership by 2 mothers who'd planned my future together. This changes nothing, Vivian said desperately, turning to Dad. Thomas, I've been your wife for 7 years. I've supported your career, raised my daughters to respect you as their stepfather, built a life with you. You can't throw that away for her. I'm not throwing anything away, Dad replied, but his voice carried a finality that made Vivian flinch. I'm reclaiming something I should never have let you take from me. My relationship with my daughter, my integrity, my responsibility as her father. Madison, who had been unusually quiet during these revelations, suddenly spoke up. Mom, you made us hate her. All those comments about her being jealous, about her trying to take advantage of Dad's success, about her restaurant being a waste of time. You made us believe she was the problem. You made me complain about her to our friends, Brooke added, her voice thick with guilt. I told everyone at school that my stepsister was this pathetic wannabe chef who resented our family's success, but she was actually more successful than any of us? The weight of years of manufactured family conflict was becoming clear. Vivian hadn't just stolen my inheritance, She'd systematically poisoned my relationships with my stepsisters, creating division and resentment where there could have been connection. "I want to know everything," I said, turning to Elena. "Every property Vivian tried to sell, every opportunity she declined, every decision she made using my authority. I want a complete audit of the damage." "Already in progress," Elena assured me. "Our legal team is reviewing 3 years of communications and transactions. There may be criminal implications beyond the civil liability." Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone terrace. "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like I'm some kind of criminal when I was protecting family interests. Sophia, you have no idea how to manage assets of this scale. You would have destroyed everything through inexperience." "Really?" I stood as well, feeling the full weight of my newfound authority. "Because from what I've seen today, I've managed to identify fraudulent business partners in 30 minutes, develop expansion strategies that will triple property values, and earn the respect of an executive team that's been waiting 3 years to work with me. What exactly have you accomplished besides nearly selling my assets to embezzlers?" The confrontation had reached its breaking point. Vivian's face cycled through rage, panic, and calculation before settling on something cold and vindictive. "Fine," she said quietly. "You want to know what I've accomplished? I've protected Thomas from the mistake of believing you're actually family. You're not his blood, you're not mine. And now that you have your precious inheritance, you won't need us. Anyway, girls, pack your things. We're leaving tonight." "No," Madison said firmly, shocking everyone at the table. "Mom, you lied to us for years. You made us treat Sophia terribly based on lies. I'm not leaving until I understand what really happened." "Madison Elizabeth Wilson, you will do as I say." "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out my phone, "as the owner of this resort, I have some authority over guest accommodations. Vivian, your access to Villa Serenidad is revoked effective immediately. You'll need to make alternative arrangements." The power play was swift and devastating. In one sentence, I'd stripped Vivian of her physical base of operations and demonstrated that her comfort was now entirely dependent on my goodwill. "You can't throw me out," Vivian said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "Elena," I said calmly, "please have security escort Mrs. Wilson to the main lobby to arrange alternative accommodations. I believe there's a budget hotel in town that might suit her needs." The echo of Vivian's own cruel suggestion from our first day that I should sleep in my car or find a budget hotel was intentional and perfectly timed. The woman who had tried to humiliate me with homelessness was now facing the same fate herself. As Elena signaled for security, Vivian made one last desperate play. "Thomas, you can't let her do this to me. I'm your wife. We took vows." Dad looked at her with an expression of profound sadness and disappointment. "You broke those vows when you chose to steal from my daughter and lie to my face for 3 years. Elena, please assist my wife in finding appropriate accommodations." The battle lines were finally drawn, and for the first time in my adult life, I was standing on the winning side. The morning of Dad's 55th birthday dawned with crystalline clarity, both literally and figuratively. I stood on the terrace of Villa Serenidad, watching the sunrise paint the Caribbean sky in brilliant hues while sipping coffee prepared by the resort's executive chef, a luxury I was still adjusting to after years of being the one doing the cooking. The events of the previous evening had set several wheels in motion. Vivian had been escorted to the Playa Dorada Inn, a modest establishment in town that was comfortable but a far cry from the luxury she'd grown accustomed to. More importantly, Elena had arranged an emergency video conference with the full board of directors of Celestial Waters Resort Chain, scheduled for 9 o'clock this morning. It was time to officially assume my role as majority owner and address the damage control needed after years of unauthorized management. Dad emerged from the villa's main bedroom, looking older than his years, but somehow lighter, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, using an endearment he hadn't called me in years. "Happy birthday, Dad," I replied, setting down my coffee cup. "How are you feeling?" He joined me at the terrace railing, staring out at the ocean where early morning fishing boats were returning with their catch. Ashamed, mostly, confused about how I let things get so far out of hand, but also… He paused, searching for words. Relieved, I think. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Before I could respond, Elena appeared at the terrace entrance with Carlos and Patricia Vega, along with a woman I didn't recognize. A tall, elegant figure in her 50s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes decisions. "Ms. Castellanos," Elena said formally, "I'd like you to meet Carmen Rodriguez, chairman of the board for Celestial Waters Resort Chain." Carmen stepped forward with a warm but assessing smile. "Sophia, it's an honor to finally meet you. Your Mother Isabella spoke of you often during our board meetings. I've been looking forward to this day for quite some time." "You knew my biological mother?" I asked, still adjusting to this new reality. "Isabella and I were close friends as well as business partners. She spoke frequently about her decision to ensure you were raised by Thomas and Elizabeth, and how proud she was of your culinary achievements." Carmen's expression grew more serious. She also expressed concerns about potential complications that might arise regarding your inheritance. "Complications like Vivian," I said, understanding immediately. "Among other things, Isabella was very specific about establishing safeguards to protect your interests, which is why she insisted on maintaining board oversight of trust activities." Carmen gestured toward the conference table that the resort staff had set up on the terrace. "Shall we begin?" The next hour was a masterclass in corporate damage control and strategic planning. Carmen walked me through detailed reports of Vivian's unauthorized activities, including documentation that was far more extensive than I'd imagined. She hadn't just intercepted communications and declined opportunities. She'd been actively working to undermine the company's value while positioning herself to benefit from distressed asset sales. The attempted sale of the Antigua property was just the beginning, Patricia Vega explained, spreading financial documents across the table. "We have evidence that she was planning to use the reduced sale price to justify devaluing other properties in the chain, creating a cascade effect that would have devastated the entire portfolio." "But why?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Because," Carmen said grimly, "her family has connections to a private equity group that specializes in acquiring distressed hospitality assets. If she could drive down the value of Celestial Waters properties, her relatives could acquire them cheaply and flip them for massive profits." The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Vivian hadn't just been stealing from me personally. She'd been orchestrating a systematic financial attack on my inheritance, designed to enrich her own family at the expense of thousands of employees and guests who depended on Celestial Waters properties. "What are our legal options?" I asked. Carmen smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd been planning for this moment for years. Isabella anticipated this possibility. She insisted on building comprehensive fraud protection into the trust structure. "We have criminal fraud, civil conspiracy, attempted embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Our corporate counsel estimates Vivian could face up to 15 years in federal prison." Dad, who had been listening to this discussion in stunned silence, finally spoke. 15 years? For what she did to Sophia? For what she did to the entire company, Carlos corrected. Her actions affected 5 resort properties, over 2,000 employees and countless guests who depend on our services. This wasn't just personal theft, it was corporate sabotage on a massive scale. As if summoned by our discussion, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown local number. Elena glanced at the caller ID and nodded grimly. "That's probably Mrs. Wilson. She's been calling the resort's main line all morning, demanding to speak with management about her unacceptable treatment." "Put it on speaker," I said, curious, to hear what Vivian's next move would be. Elena connected the call, and Vivian's voice filled the terrace with its familiar tone of entitled indignation. "This is unconscionable. I demand to speak with whoever's in charge of that resort immediately. My family has been subjected to harassment and illegal eviction by an unstable individual who has clearly manipulated resort staff." "Hello, Vivian," I interrupted calmly. "I'm afraid the person in charge of the resort is unavailable. However, as the owner, I'd be happy to address your concerns." The silence that followed was profound. When Vivian finally spoke again, her voice had shifted to something calculating and dangerous. "Sophia, I should have known you'd be behind this vindictive display. You've always been jealous of what Thomas and I built together." "Actually," Carmen interjected, "this is Carmen Rodriguez, chairman of the board for Celestial Waters Resort Chain. Mrs. Wilson, I believe you and I need to have a conversation about your unauthorized communications with our corporate offices over the past 3 years." Another silence, longer this time. When Vivian spoke again, desperation had crept into her voice. "There's been a misunderstanding. I was simply helping Thomas manage complex family assets." "Mrs. Wilson," Carmen continued with professional coldness, "you are not a family member with any legal standing regarding these assets. You have fraudulently represented yourself as having authority to negotiate property sales, declined legitimate business opportunities without authorization, and attempted to manipulate asset valuations for the apparent benefit of third parties with whom you have personal connections. Furthermore," Patricia Vega added, "our forensic accounting team has identified over $3 million in unauthorized expenses charged to corporate accounts using your forged authorization documents." $3 million. The number hit Dad like a physical blow. Vivian charged $3 million to Sophia's accounts? Luxury travel, designer purchases, jewelry, even private school tuition for your stepsisters, Elena confirmed, all charged to accounts that belong to Ms. Castellanos, all authorized with forged signatures and fraudulent documentation. The call erupted with Vivian's voice, now shrill with panic. "Those were legitimate family expenses. Thomas approved every purchase. You can't prove—" "Actually, we can," Carmen said smoothly. "Mrs. Wilson, our corporate security team is currently preparing a comprehensive evidence package for the federal authorities. You have until this afternoon to retain legal counsel before formal charges are filed." The line went dead. Vivian had hung up, probably realizing that her situation had moved far beyond family drama into serious criminal territory. Dad sat heavily in his chair, his face pale with shock and shame. $3 million. She stole $3 million from you while I watched her do it. "Dad, you didn't know." "I should have known," he interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your father. I was supposed to protect you, and instead, I let her manipulate me into helping her steal from you. How do you ever forgive something like that?" Before I could answer, Madison and Brooke appeared at the terrace entrance, both looking haggard and confused. They'd apparently spent the night in one of the resort's guest rooms, processing the complete collapse of everything they'd believed about their family dynamics. "Sophia," Madison said hesitantly, "we heard Mom on the phone with someone this morning. She was screaming about lawyers and federal charges. Is she really in trouble with the law?" I looked at these 2 young women who'd been raised to see me as an enemy and felt an unexpected surge of compassion. They were victims of Vivian's manipulation just as much as I was, programmed from childhood to participate in cruelty they didn't understand. "Yes," I said gently. "Your mother has been committing serious crimes for years, using my inheritance to fund your family's lifestyle while actively working to destroy the businesses that employed thousands of people. The authorities will be involved," Brooke began, crying quietly, the weight of realization finally hitting her. "We knew you were different after Mom married Dad, but we thought it was because you resented us. We never imagined she was lying about everything." "What happens to us now?" Madison asked, her voice small and frightened. If Mom goes to prison, if Dad divorces her, what happens to Brooke and me? The question hung in the air as I considered my response. These weren't the entitled stepsisters who dismissed my career and treated me like hired help. These were confused young women whose entire understanding of family and loyalty had been shattered in 24 hours. That depends, I said finally, on whether you want to be part of rebuilding something honest and real, or whether you want to continue living in the fantasy your mother created. It was time for everyone in our fractured family to choose what kind of people they wanted to be moving forward. 1 year later, I stood in the stunning new test kitchen of Sage and Thyme Paradise Cove, watching the sunrise illuminate the Caribbean, see-through floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was a perfect fusion of professional functionality and tropical elegance, designed to serve both as a working kitchen for the resort's signature restaurant and a culinary classroom where guests could learn from visiting chefs from around the world. The transformation had been remarkable, not just of the physical space, but of my entire life. What had started as a humiliating family vacation where I was forced to cook every meal had led to discovering my true identity as the heir to a hospitality empire, and ultimately to creating something even more meaningful than I'd ever imagined possible. The morning prep looks perfect, said Chef Marcus Delacroix, my new executive chef, as he reviewed the station setups for today's cooking class. Marcus had come to us from Le Bernardin in New York, drawn not just by the opportunity to create a destination dining experience, but by the unique program we'd developed where guests could participate in authentic culinary education while enjoying their luxury vacation. Thank you, Marcus. How are our students feeling about today's menu? I asked, tying my apron around my waist. Even as the owner of Celestial Waters Resort chain, I still preferred to teach the hands-on cooking classes myself. Some things were too important to delegate. Enthusiastic and slightly terrified, he replied with a grin. Learning to prepare. Fresh conch ceviche and jerk-spiced red snapper isn't exactly beginner territory, but you have a gift for making the complex seem achievable. Through the kitchen's open doors, I could see Elena approaching with a small group of guests. Today's cooking class participants. Among them were Madison and Brooke, who had become regular visitors to Paradise Cove over the past year, as we'd worked to rebuild our family relationships on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. The journey hadn't been easy. Vivian had ultimately pled guilty to federal fraud charges and was serving a 7-year sentence, her private equity conspiracy having collapsed when her criminal activities became public. Dad had divorced her within 6 months, the legal proceedings complicated by the need to untangle years of fraudulent financial activities. But the most challenging work had been rebuilding trust between family members who'd been programmed to see each other as adversaries. "Good morning, Chef Sophia," Madison said warmly as the group entered the kitchen. At 21, she'd matured dramatically from the entitled teenager who'd once dismissed my career as burger flipping. She was now a junior at culinary school in New York, having discovered a genuine passion for pastry arts that had nothing to do with her mother's manipulative ambitions. "Morning, Mads. Ready to work on your knife skills?" I replied, noting the confident way she moved through the professional kitchen space. The transformation in my relationship with both stepsisters had been one of the most surprising and rewarding outcomes of the past year's upheaval. Brooke, now 19 and studying sustainable tourism management at the University of Miami, was documenting today's class for the resort's social media channels. Her natural eye for photography and genuine enthusiasm for showcasing the human stories behind luxury hospitality had made her an invaluable part of our marketing team. "The lighting in here is absolutely perfect this morning," Brooke said, adjusting her camera settings. "The way the sunrise hits the prep stations is going to make amazing content for the culinary program promotion." As the other guests settled into their stations, a honeymooning couple from Toronto, a retired food writer from London, and a tech entrepreneur from San Francisco who'd booked the class as a break from her high-stress career, I felt the familiar joy that came from sharing culinary knowledge with passionate students. Welcome to Sage and Thyme Paradise Cove, I began, addressing the group while Marcus distributed ingredient kits. Today we're going to explore the fusion of Caribbean flavors with classical French technique, creating dishes that tell the story of this region's complex cultural heritage. As I demonstrated the proper technique for cleaning fresh conch, explaining the importance of removing every trace of sand and membrane, I caught sight of Dad entering the kitchen's observation area. At 56, he looked healthier and more relaxed than he had in years, the stress lines around his eyes softened by regular sleep, and the peace that came from living authentically. He'd become an integral part of Celestial Waters' operations, using his decades of business experience to help streamline our corporate structure, while I focused on the creative and hospitality aspects of the company. The partnership had allowed us to grow closer than we'd ever been, built on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than the complicated dynamics that Vivian's manipulation had created. The key to perfect ceviche, I continued, showing the class, how to dice the conch into uniform pieces, is understanding that the acid from the citrus is actually cooking the protein. Too little lime juice, and the texture remains tough. Too much, and it becomes rubbery. Finding the perfect balance requires patience and attention to detail. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. The past year had been its own form of ceviche, using ki, the acid of truth, to transform raw, painful situations into something nourishing and beautiful. It had required patience, attention to detail, and the willingness to trust in a process that didn't always look like it was working. As the class worked on their individual preparations, I moved between stations offering guidance and encouragement. The tech entrepreneur was struggling with her knife work, clearly accustomed to solving problems with logic rather than intuition. The food writer was asking detailed questions about spice sourcing and traditional preparation methods. The honeymooning couple was playfully competing to see who could dice their vegetables more precisely. "Chef Sophia," the food writer called out, "I'm curious about the business model here. How did you decide to integrate culinary education with luxury hospitality? It's quite innovative." I smiled, thinking about the journey that had led to this moment. The concept actually came from my mother, my biological mother, who believed that exceptional dining experiences should be educational as well as delicious. She envisioned resorts where guests didn't just consume luxury, but participated in creating it. "Your biological mother?" the tech entrepreneur asked, looking up from her cutting board with curiosity. It was a story I'd become comfortable telling. Over the past year, having learned that transparency about my complex family history only strengthened the connections I built with guests and staff. I was adopted as a baby, but my birth mother continued to be involved in planning my future. She was one of the founders of Celestial Waters Resort chain, and she specifically designed the culinary program to prepare me for eventually running these resorts. "So this was always your destiny?" the honeymooning husband asked. "In a way, yes. Though I had to discover it the hard way," I replied, thinking about that morning a year ago when I'd stood in this very location, sweating over breakfast preparations while my stepfamily lounged by the pool. Sometimes the most important revelations come disguised as the worst moments of your life. As the class progressed to preparing the jerk-spiced red snapper, Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway with Carlos and Patricia Vega. Their presence meant one thing. Today was the day we'd been planning for months. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the cooking class, "I have some exciting news to share. Today marks the official opening of our 6th Celestial Waters property and the launch of Sage and Thyme's 4th international location." I gestured toward the wall-mounted screen that Elena activated, showing architectural renderings of our newest resort in Costa Rica, complete with its own dedicated culinary center and sustainable farming program. More importantly, I continued, feeling the weight of accomplishment and possibility, today we're announcing the Celestial Waters Culinary Foundation, a program that will provide scholarships and training opportunities for aspiring chefs from underserved communities throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. The foundation had been Madison's idea, born from her own experience of discovering that talent and opportunity don't always align. Working with her over the past year had shown me that she had inherited her mother's strategic thinking, but chose to use it for creation rather than destruction. As the cooking class concluded with a beautiful lunch served on the terrace overlooking the ocean, I reflected on the complete transformation of my life. A year ago, I'd been told to cook for my family as their unpaid servant at a resort I didn't know I owned. Today, I was training the next generation of culinary professionals while building a hospitality empire that honored both innovation and tradition. Dad joined me on the terrace as the guests dispersed, our conversation comfortable in the way that only comes from rebuilding trust through consistent actions rather than words. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly, looking out at the ocean where a few early afternoon fishing boats were visible on the horizon. "Both of them. Elizabeth for raising you to be strong enough to handle all this, and Isabella for having the vision to create something that would ultimately bring out the best in you." "And Vivian?" I asked, not because I missed her, but because her absence still shaped our family dynamics in complex ways. "Vivian taught us all valuable lessons about the importance of honesty and the cost of manipulation," Dad replied thoughtfully. "Madison and Brooke needed to see the consequences of building relationships on lies. You needed to discover your own strength, and I needed to learn that being a good father means protecting what matters, even when it's difficult." As the afternoon sun warmed the terrace and the sound of waves provided a gentle backdrop to our conversation, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from transforming pain into purpose. The family vacation where they'd made me cook every meal had ultimately led to discovering not just my inheritance, but my true calling as someone who could create meaningful experiences that brought people together around food, hospitality, and genuine human connection. Sometimes the universe's sense of humor is actually wisdom in disguise, turning the worst moments into the foundation for the best ones. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.